Marco Rubio recently subjected Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to one of the most thoroughly dismantling moments ever witnessed in Congress. I have observed countless hearings over the years, the vast majority of which fade from memory the moment I walk out to my car. However, this particular session has occupied my thoughts continuously since it occurred. Marco Rubio directed exactly 8 words toward Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in that committee room. She pressed the button on her microphone to deliver a retort, yet found herself completely unable to articulate a single syllable in return. To fully grasp why this happened, you need to understand the sequence of events that led up to it. The setting was Rayburn Room 2359. During an appropriations hearing focused on the State Department's budget, Rubio sat calmly at the witness table, equipped with nothing more than a single folder and a glass of water. Sitting across from him was AOC, armed with a thick binder bursting with color-coded tabs and a smartphone resting face-up on the desk. When the chairman yielded her the floor, she seized it in her signature style, rapid, loud, and brimming with absolute certainty. She immediately launched an offensive against Rubio regarding proposed reductions in foreign aid. She accused him of entirely dismantling initiatives designed to shield vulnerable women and children abroad. She claimed that under his guidance, the State Department had devolved into, to use her exact phrasing, a vanity project for Cold War nostalgia. Then, she twisted the figurative knife. The secretary, she proclaimed, appeared far more invested in resolving personal family vendettas involving Cuba than in actually advancing America's interests on the global stage. She went on to state that the individuals applauding his actions, the ones mistaking his behavior for genuine leadership, are the very same people who derive their entire understanding of foreign affairs from evening cable news broadcasts. That, she declared, is merely entertainment, not actual expertise. And there it was, that familiar tone of condescension. I have watched her employ this exact tactic for half a decade. She evaluates the room before the gavel even strikes, mentally categorizing who is intelligent and who is not. And she makes sure you know exactly which category she has placed you in. She delivers these lines with a faint smirk, as if she is doing you a tremendous favor simply by insulting your intelligence. I want to emphasize that she made these statements while staring directly into a camera broadcasting to the entire nation. She was looking at citizens tuning into their 7:00 p.m. news after a grueling day of work, effectively telling them they were too simple-minded to comprehend international politics, people who have been faithfully tracking the trajectory of their nation for 4 decades. She said it intentionally, accompanied by that slight smile, and she meant every single word. If that arrogance struck a nerve with you the way it did with me, I urge you to pay close attention, because Marco Rubio's subsequent response is the sole reason I am recounting this event. But before detailing Rubio's counter, I must introduce you to a woman named Gloria. Gloria is an 82-year-old resident of Queens who retired after dedicating 31 years of her life to sorting mail for the post office. A couple of years ago, Gloria's granddaughter showed her a video clip and told her, "Grandma, this woman is fighting for working-class people exactly like us." Inspired, Gloria contributed $18 out of her monthly Social Security check to AOC's political campaign. $18 is a highly deliberate figure. It is the kind of exact amount someone settles on only after carefully calculating what remains after paying the rent, buying groceries, and covering the utility bills. Keep that $18 figure in your mind. It will become incredibly relevant shortly. Rubio offered absolutely no visible reaction to her insults. He never does. Anyone who has closely studied his political methodology knows this is his trademark. He simply refuses to take the bait. He sat perfectly still, hands clasped together, and patiently waited for her to conclude her tirade. He allowed the resulting silence to linger just a fraction longer than what is generally considered comfortable. Then, he politely thanked her. He stated that he genuinely appreciated the Congresswoman's intense passion regarding the allocation of taxpayer dollars. That, he noted, is a subject we should all be deeply invested in monitoring how funds are dispersed, where they ultimately end up, and whether they genuinely benefit the vulnerable populations that desperately need them. If you had any inkling of what was concealed inside his solitary folder, you would have recognized the jaws of a meticulously laid trap beginning to snap shut. He wasn't lecting or changing the topic. Rather, he was carefully constructing the very platform he was about to rip out from beneath her feet. "Congresswoman," he began, "you have occupied a seat in the House of Representatives since January of 2019. That amounts to 7 years. Over that span, exactly how many pieces of legislation that you personally sponsored have been signed into federal law? In response, she spoke continuously for roughly a minute and a half. She discussed the importance of vocal advocacy, the crafting of legislative amendments, the intricacies of coalition building, the grind of committee assignments, and her role in shifting the overarching national dialogue. She spoke eloquently and seemed highly rehearsed. She addressed a multitude of concepts except for the specific numerical question he had posed to her. Rubio patiently allowed her to finish her elaborate explanation before delivering a single word: zero. Since she refused to provide the actual metric, he supplied it for her. Rubio pointed out that despite 7 years in office and a staggering 13 million followers across her social media platforms, not a single bill bearing her name as the primary sponsor had been signed into law by any sitting president. I jotted that specific ratio down on a piece of paper right after the hearing concluded, and I haven't been able to stop looking at it since. 13 million to 0. That is not the footprint of a serious legislative record. That is the profile of a social media influencer collecting a taxpayer-funded government salary. Following that, Rubio employed a tactic familiar to those who have watched him dismantle opponents in the past. He didn't immediately reach for the primary weapon in his folder. Instead, he took a brief detour, and that detour was centered on Munich. You traveled to the Munich Security Conference this past February, he noted, acting as a representative of this nation on the global stage at the most critical foreign policy summit in Europe. And while there, you confidently informed an audience on camera, in full view of both our closest allies and our most dangerous adversaries, that the nation of Venezuela is located below the equator. He paused for effect. Venezuela is located entirely within the Northern Hemisphere, Congresswoman, every single square mile of its territory. I have dedicated 3 decades to analyzing Western Hemisphere policy. My own family fled one of those very nations, yet the individual who aspires to dictate American foreign policy couldn't locate Venezuela on a standard globe. To her credit, she didn't visibly wince, but the atmosphere in the room fundamentally altered. You could sense the shift, much like feeling the deck of a ship suddenly list to one side. Getting a nation's fundamental geographic location incorrect on an international stage is not a trivial oversight or a minor slip of the tongue. It acts as a glaring indicator of exactly how little actual preparation was dedicated to the performance. Our strategic partners were sitting in that room in Munich, as were our geopolitical rivals, and the woman harboring ambitions to command American foreign diplomacy inadvertently revealed to all of them that she was ignorant of which hemisphere Venezuela occupies. That isn't just a simple gaffe, it's a reflection of her core credentials. And yet, you are presently sitting in an appropriations hearing, Rubio continued, instructing this committee on the proper utilization of funds in Latin America. Therefore, let me transition to inquiring about some specific spending that you have personally overseen. It was at this moment that he finally opened the folder. I have in my possession your Federal Election Commission financial filings for 2025. These are your campaign's own disbursement records, officially filed under your own name and authorized by your own campaign treasurer. She was entirely unprepared for the contents of that folder. I could see the realization manifest in her body language. Her right hand darted toward one of the colored tabs on her binder, only to freeze mid-motion. That split-second hesitation revealed everything. She possessed 22 separate tabs containing 22 pre-planned lines of attack, and absolutely none of them had prepared her for this specific confrontation. Here is the critical context you must grasp before he even began reading. Something the television cameras could never adequately capture. Every single document inside that folder, every specific numeral, every hotel brand, and every exact monetary sum was pulled directly from her own legally mandated filings. She signed off on them. Her own treasurer submitted them to the federal government. They are a matter of permanent public record, accessible to anyone with an internet connection. Rubio didn't unearth any hidden secrets. He simply read back the data she had willingly provided. And that is precisely what made the ensuing 10 minutes an event I will likely never forget. She had unwittingly constructed her own snare. She just hadn't realized she was standing in it yet. He was preparing to pull the data from that folder, and the revelations inside would fundamentally alter your perspective on every political donation you have ever contributed. If you know anyone who has sacrificed $18 or $25 to support a politician they genuinely believed in, you need to share this narrative with them, because this is the moment the receipts start speaking for themselves. Rubio picked up the top sheet of paper with the casual demeanor of someone picking up a grocery receipt from a kitchen counter. There were no theatrics, only hard data. The Langham Huntington in Pasadena, California, he read aloud. $3,200 for a single hotel stay. This occurred during the exact same week you stood before a rally and passionately declared that average working families in America can no longer afford to buy groceries. He looked up, locking eyes with her. The average family residing in your own district, spanning the Bronx and Queens, spends exactly that amount to feed their families for 4 entire months. 4 months of putting food on the table for a family, Congresswoman, equated to a single night in your chosen hotel. He calmly placed the paper face down and lifted the subsequent page. The Ve, Dara Hotel and Spa in Las Vegas, Nevada, $2.9. You booked this stay in Las Vegas while attending the Fight Oligarchy rally alongside Senator Sanders. He placed it perfectly parallel to the first document. You were waging war against the oligarchy from the confines of a luxury spa, Congresswoman. A spa. Every single individual sitting in the public gallery was simultaneously performing that exact financial arithmetic in their heads. The realization was visible in their posture as they collectively leaned closer. A woman seated in the third row instinctively covered her mouth in shock. A gentleman sitting near the center aisle began to shake his head in slow disbelief, and he didn't stop for several minutes. This is the crucial dynamic the cameras missed. Rubio wasn't reading those exorbitant figures simply to humiliate AOC. He was reading them aloud for the benefit of the people who had unwittingly financed them. He was speaking to the grassroots donors, the retirees who sacrificed $25, the military veterans who sent $30, the single mothers who stretched their budgets to give $50 because they held a sincere belief that their money was funding a meaningful cause. He was listing off those receipts with the same grim tone you would use to inform someone of a massive fraudulent charge on their credit card. If you have ever opened a bank statement and discovered a massive withdrawal you never authorized, you understand the exact tension that permeated that hearing room. At this juncture, she attempted to mount a defense. To maintain fairness, I must note that she did not capitulate easily, nor should she have. Every single member of the United States Congress incurs travel expenses. She shot back. Her cadence was rapid, piercing, and laced with aggression, her default demeanor when cornered and transitioning to an offensive stance. And make no mistake, she is highly skilled when operating on the attack. You are reciting standard FEC filings as if they represent a criminal indictment. They are not. They are standard operating procedures. This is the basic reality of how political campaigns operate. She leaned aggressively toward her microphone. If you truly want to debate the ethics of spending, Mr. Secretary, let us discuss the billions of dollars you are ruthlessly slashing from initiatives that provide food for starving children internationally. Let us discuss the vulnerable women and young girls that your proposed budget callously abandons. Let us talk about real, consequential spending that impacts actual human lives. She was genuinely fighting back now, putting up a fierce resistance, and I will admit something that might be surprising. Her counterattack actually landed. You could feel a palpable shift in the room's energy. A pair of journalists sitting in the press section suddenly began typing furiously. A staff member positioned behind her visibly straightened their posture. For a brief span of about 15 seconds, she had entirely reclaimed the momentum. She commanded the room, she commanded the microphone, and she utilized that booming, authoritative voice that is capable of dominating a space when she is deeply convinced of her own righteousness. And in that specific moment, she genuinely believed her own defense. Do not let anyone convince you otherwise. However, Rubio refused to engage in a debate regarding international foreign aid. He simply ignored the bait. This incredible discipline is precisely what makes him such a lethal presence in a congressional hearing. He absorbs the rhetorical blow, allows the audience to register the impact, and then methodically pivots right back to the empirical evidence as if the interruption never occurred. I am in no way questioning your legal right to travel, Congresswoman, he replied evenly. What I am fiercely questioning is the narrative you spin to the struggling families who are forced to finance it. He held up the third receipt. The Asher Adams Hotel in Salt Lake City, Utah, $3,445. The median cost of monthly rent within your own congressional district is $1,800. That represents nearly 2 full months of your constituents' housing costs, blown on a single night in Utah. He placed it deliberately next to the others, forming a tidy row of financial evidence, 4 documents aligned side by side like a losing hand of poker someone had forgotten to fold. And the next one, Hotel Palacio Provincial in San Juan, Puerto Rico, $9,440. He raised his eyes slowly. This was billed during the exact same year you stood before the Munich conference and declared that Venezuela was located below the equator. You couldn't identify the nation on a map, Congresswoman, but you had absolutely no trouble locating the luxury resort. This was the exact moment my thoughts drifted back to Gloria. $9,440. Gloria's monthly Social Security disbursement amounts to roughly $1,800. That single luxury hotel invoice in Puerto Rico equated to more than 5 entire months of Gloria's total livelihood. 5 months of an elderly woman's survival expended on one vacation stay. And she had mailed that campaign $18 because her granddaughter had convinced her that a politician was out there fighting on her behalf. Rubio was far from finished. He lowered the paper and stared directly at her. 62% of your campaign donors contribute sums under $50. These are retired seniors, military veterans, and working-class mothers. These are individuals who have to meticulously count every dollar before they can afford to give it away. They sent you $18, $25, or $30 because they harbored a genuine belief that you were going to battle for their interests. He tapped the neat row of hotel invoices, and this is where their hard-earned money went to sleep. This is the pivotal point where the narrative ceased to be about one specific politician and instead became a referendum on every single citizen who has ever placed their trust and their wages in the hands of someone in Washington. $25 may not seem like a vast sum until you fully recognize that it was supplied by someone who had to calculate its impact first, someone who stared down a utility bill, a grocery budget, and a pharmacy copay, and ultimately concluded they could sacrifice $25 to support a leader they believed in. If you have ever been in that position, you instinctively understand the gravity of what was unfolding in that room. Sensing the walls closing in, she played what she considered her trump card. Her tone shifted dramatically, dropping lower, becoming quieter and deeply personal. "I am a working-class woman born and raised in the Bronx," she stated. "I worked behind a bar. I counted my tips at the conclusion of exhausting shifts and constantly worried about whether I would be able to make rent that month. I know intimately what it feels like to have to check the balance of your bank account before you dare to buy groceries. You do not possess the right to sit comfortably in the State Department and lecture me about the realities of the working class, Mr. Secretary. You have absolutely no conception of what my life experiences have been. And here is the objective truth. She was not lying. She truly did work as a bartender. She did have to rely on counting tips. She did experience genuine anxiety regarding her rent payments. That foundation of her personal biography was factual, and the sincerity of those past struggles was evident in her voice. However, the crucial question Rubio was preparing to address was brilliantly simple. Was that working-class narrative still her current reality, or had it merely morphed into a convenient costume she pulled from the closet whenever she required a room to feel sympathetic toward her? "My mother was a hotel maid, Congresswoman," Rubio replied. His voice was remarkably quiet, not weak or soft, but intensely quiet. There is a profound distinction. The entire gallery physically leaned forward to ensure they caught his words. She physically cleaned the exact type of rooms detailed on your FEC expenditure reports. The Langham, the Vidara, the Asher Adams. She meticulously made those beds. She scrubbed those luxury bathrooms on her hands and knees. She returned home every single evening of my childhood reeking of industrial bleach. And she never complained about it a single time, because that is simply what resilient people do when they are breaking their backs to provide their children with a better future. He paused for 2 agonizingly long seconds. She never once, in her entire lifetime, had the privilege of sleeping in one of those beds. He let another heavy pause hang in the air. You worked as a bartender for a few brief years, and then you secured a victory in an election. My mother scrubbed hotel rooms for decades of her life. The most luxurious accommodation she ever stayed in was a standard Holiday Inn down in Orlando to celebrate my nephew's birthday. She walked into that basic room and declared it was the most magnificent place she had ever laid eyes on. He locked his gaze onto hers. "I know precisely what the genuine working class looks like, Congresswoman. And I assure you, it does not resemble a $3,445 receipt logged under campaign travel expenses." Not a single soul in that hearing room uttered a sound. Nobody needed to. The silence was so absolute you could distinctly hear the hum of the air conditioning vents and the subtle rustle of a cameraman shifting his footing. That is how deafening the quiet had become. Because what Marco Rubio had just executed was not a standard political debate tactic. It was not a rehearsed comeback, a witty zinger, or a superficial gotcha moment designed for social media. It was the sight of a man standing squarely in the chasm between two contrasting versions of the American working-class story, demanding to know which one held true. Two individuals claiming working-class origins, one whose mother still bore the metaphorical scars of bleach under her fingernails, and the other clutching a stack of $3,000 hotel receipts. And if you happened to grow up in a household where a parent returned home exhausted from a grueling job that no journalist would ever bother to write a headline about, you instantly knew which of those two stories was authentic. You didn't require Rubio to spell it out for you. You have understood it your entire life. His mother labored to make those beds. She sacrificed her life, preparing rooms that cost more for a single night than she took home in an entire week. She scrubbed porcelain she would never be permitted to use and folded plush towels she would never be allowed to enjoy. Meanwhile, the politician who aggressively brands herself as the ultimate champion of the working class slept deeply in those exact same rooms, financed entirely by donor contribution. If you know the lingering scent of bleach at the end of a punishing shift, share this account with just one person right now, because the climax of this exchange is what ultimately shattered her facade. Then, an event occurred that I genuinely believe she never anticipated. A Democratic representative sitting on the subcommittee, a congressman representing a highly competitive swing district who had likely voted alongside her more frequently than he preferred to admit, slowly adjusted his microphone. He had remained completely silent for the duration of the hearing, sitting with his hands neatly folded. When he finally spoke, his tone was measured and quiet, possessing the cadence of a man who had debated whether or not to utter these words for a very long time. "I find myself in disagreement with the Secretary on the vast majority of issues," he began. "However, when my constituents inevitably ask me why they should place their trust in Congress, I advise them to observe our actions, not our rhetoric, not our social media posts. Our concrete actions." He paused deliberately. "I have observed the Congresswoman's social media presence. It is undeniably impressive. But I have actively searched for her tangible legislative accomplishments." Another heavy pause. "And I am still searching." That devastating critique originated from her own side of the political aisle, and you could visibly witness how differently it impacted her. A standard partisan assault from a Republican was something she was equipped to brush off. She had been navigating those since her very first week in Washington. But a solemnly delivered critique from a fellow party member, someone who gained absolutely no political advantage from speaking out, someone intentionally incinerating a professional bridge on live television simply because he believed the truth necessitated it, that was an entirely different magnitude of damage. That wasn't a political game. That was a peer looking directly at a coworker and publicly stating, "I have watched your ongoing performance. I have searched for the actual labor, and I have found it entirely absent. I have witnessed that specific expression on people's faces in the past. It is the distinct look that materializes in the exact second someone realizes that an entire room has ceased to fear them. And once a collective group stops being intimidated by you, that fear rarely ever returns. There is no clever tweet capable of fixing that dynamic. There is no viral Instagram live stream that can magically reinstall that lost intimidation factor." She attempted to rally one final time. I will give her credit for persisting until the bitter end. She did not simply surrender. "You can obsess over counting bills if you so choose," she countered. But the Green New Deal fundamentally altered the entire national dialogue regarding climate change. The tax the rich dress was viewed by over 30 million individuals. I single-handedly shifted the parameters of the debate on universal health care, on systemic inequality, and on what this nation fundamentally owes its working citizens. You can tally up signed laws all day long. I prefer to count the millions of American citizens who are actively discussing these critical issues today simply because I forced them onto the table. That impact is not nothing. That is not zero. That is the definition of leadership. She articulated a valid point. I fundamentally disagree with her political ideology, and I would never cast a ballot for her under any circumstances, but I will not be dishonest about her influence. She has successfully engineered a colossal brand that has undeniably shifted public discourse on specific progressive issues, and attempting to deny that reality would be disingenuous. Several individuals in the hearing room subtly nodded in agreement as she spoke. However, the core issue at hand was never whether she possessed the ability to stimulate a conversation. The real issue was identifying the exorbitant cost of that conversation and exposing exactly who was footing the bill. And this is her predictable strategy whenever undeniable evidence corners her. She drastically broadens the scope. She pivots to grandiose concepts like historical movements and pivotal cultural moments. But there is a glaring flaw in that defense mechanism. Abstract history does not file quarterly expenditure reports with the FEC. She did. Cultural movements do not personally check into the Langham Huntington. She did. And the countless individuals who unknowingly bankrolled those movements, the countless Glorias out there meticulously rationing their Social Security checks, did not donate their meager funds to simply sponsor a conversation. They donated to a human being they mistakenly believed they could trust. Rubio dismantled that exact defense. "You sparked a conversation," he noted flatly. "I signed a treaty. You changed the parameters of a debate. I helped change a government." He let the weight of the contrast settle over the room. "You wore a provocative dress, and $53,000 of your working-class donors' money slept securely in five-star luxury hotels." He leaned forward, closing the distance. "Conversations do not put food on the table for starving families, Congresswoman. Concrete laws do. Binding treaties do. That 82-year old woman sitting in Queens who sacrificed $18 out of her fixed Social Security check for your campaign did not make that donation so you could comfortably move a conversation. She donated because she trusted that you were going to fight for her survival, and you took her $18 and used it to help cover your tab at the Langham Huntington in Pasadena, California." He didn't need to elevate the volume of his voice. He didn't have to shout. Sometimes, the most devastating blows are delivered quietly, and everyone present was acutely aware of it. You could feel the psychological equilibrium of the room tip, not with a sudden, violent crash, but with the slow, agonizing creak of a massive tree that has been sawed straight through and is just beginning to decide which direction it will finally collapse. Every single observer in that gallery knew exactly how this was going to end. The only individual who appeared oblivious to the inevitable was the woman fiercely gripping her microphone. Having spent considerable time in Washington, I possess enough experience to distinguish between a fleeting, superficial moment and a profound event that permanently alters the underlying dynamics of a room. You can physically sense it in the atmosphere. You feel it in the distinct way onlookers cease scrolling on their smartphones and unconsciously begin to hold their breath. What transpired next fell squarely into the latter category. Rubio calmly gathered the scattered FEC receipts in front of him, organizing them into a perfectly neat pile. He precisely squared the paper edges using his fingertips, mimicking the motions of a seasoned card dealer preparing to distribute the final, deciding hand. The room was already enveloped in silence, but it somehow grew even quieter, the specific variety of absolute silence where you can distinctly hear the thumping of your own pulse. And then, he delivered those final 8 words. I will tell you exactly what those words were, and then I will describe what happened to the room immediately after they were spoken. You will finally understand why I felt compelled to recount this entire narrative from the very beginning. Over my 30 years observing politics, I have heard countless memorable quotes within those walls, clever retorts, sharp barbs, and sound bites engineered for the evening broadcasts that inevitably fade into obscurity by the weekend. This was categorically different. This was something far more permanent. "Congresswoman," he stated, his voice steady, "you have spent the last 7 years convincing America that you are tirelessly fighting the oligarchy." He tapped the pristine stack of financial receipts exactly once with his index finger. $53,000 incinerated on luxury hotel accommodations, first-class airline tickets, a Bad Bunny concert viewed from an exclusive luxury suite, and $150 culinary tasting menus. He locked his eyes onto hers, allowing 3 full seconds of agonizing silence to pass. "You didn't fight the oligarchy, Congresswoman. You expensed it." AOC instinctively lunged for the button on her microphone. I heard the sharp, distinct click echo loudly through the chamber's audio speakers. The entire room registered that tiny, mechanical sound of the mic going live. Every camera lens in the room immediately zoomed in on her face. Every single person in the public gallery leaned collectively forward. I found myself leaning forward as well. Everyone was bracing themselves for her inevitable rebuttal, because she always possessed a rebuttal. That was her defining talent. That was the singular asset that had propelled her from a modest bar in the Bronx all the way to a seat in the United States Congress. She was never without words, even when everyone else found themselves speechless. 3 seconds dragged by, then 5 seconds. She parted her lips, only to snap them shut again. Her fingers remained firmly planted on the activation button, but her legendary voice was trapped somewhere deep down where she couldn't summon it. You could physically watch her frantically searching her mind for the right phrasing, looking exactly like someone blindly reaching for an object on a high shelf, only to have their hand close on empty air. Then, she slowly released the button. Click. The microphone went entirely dead. Not a single solitary word was uttered between those two mechanical clicks. Just profound, echoing silence. 5 agonizingly long seconds of dead air, broadcast live to millions of screens across the nation. That remains the loudest silence I have ever experienced in 3 decades of attending committee hearing. After witnessing hundreds of testimonies and thousands of interrogations, I have never known a room to become that completely paralyzed. The committee chairman nervously cleared his throat, breaking the spell. Does the gentlewoman from New York wish to offer a response? She merely shook her head a single time. Her hand slowly retreated back to her massive binder. Her fingers grazed a brightly colored tab, the very next pre-planned attack in her sequence. She didn't bother to flip the page. Instead, she methodically closed the heavy binder and placed both of her hands flat upon the cover. She was utterly defeated. 22 meticulously prepared tabs, and not a single one contained an adequate defense against those 8 simple words. I remained seated in the gallery, struck by a singular thought. This is exactly what it looks like when an individual who has spent 7 years performing finally collides with a man who has spent 30 years working. The theatrical performance simply ran out of material. The grounded reality of the work did not. 2 tiny clicks of a button, separated by 5 seconds of devastating silence. That is the precise sound of a carefully curated political brand shattering into pieces on live television. When a persona meticulously constructed over 7 years is suddenly confronted by a stack of its own undeniable receipts, and finds itself incapable of formulating a single syllable in its defense. If those 8 words resonated with you even half as much as they resonated with me, make sure you turn on your notifications, because the fallout from this story did not conclude inside that hearing room. By that very afternoon, those 8 words had become the viral clip of the day. Someone neatly edited the clean 40-second segment, starting from Rubio, tapping the stack of receipts, and ending with the final defeated click of her microphone, and it dominated screens across the nation. Enterprising editors juxtaposed the footage alongside clips of her screaming at her fight oligarchy rallies. Others displayed the video right next to a high-resolution image of the $3,445 Asher Adams Hotel invoice. A veteran campaign strategist of my acquaintance texted a colleague a succinct 2-sentence analysis. She can never use the word oligarchy again. He just permanently took it away from her. I cannot say for certain if that banishment will last forever, but I do know this much to be true. I have not heard her utter the word a single time since that exchange occurred. That evening, back in Queens, Gloria sat quietly at her small kitchen table, the exact same table where she meticulously calculates her Social Security budget every single month using a graphite pencil and a worn notepad, simply because that is the method she has always relied upon. Her granddaughter had kindly queued up the video on a tablet before departing for her evening work shift. Gloria watched the 40-second clip exactly once. She didn't click share. She didn't type out a fiery comment. She didn't pick up the phone to call her friends. She simply sat there in silence, her hands neatly folded together on the table. She folded them in the specific, dignified manner that women of her resilient generation do when they are quietly processing something of profound importance. She sat there and thought deeply about spending $3,445 for a single night in Salt Lake City. She had never traveled to Utah in her entire life. She had never, not even once, slept in a hotel room that cost more than $89 a night. When her granddaughter eventually returned home, Gloria never mentioned the video. She just remained seated at that humble kitchen table, thinking quietly about her $18 donation, and idly wondering if the Asher Adams Hotel at least offered a nice view. As for Rubio, he simply closed his folder, that single, remarkably thin folder he had carried into the room that morning. He stood up, calmly buttoned his suit jacket, and walked out the doors of Rayburn 2359 without pausing to acknowledge a single question from the swarm of reporters shouting his name down the marble corridor. Someone yelled a frantic question regarding the FEC record. He didn't bother to turn around. Another reporter shouted, asking how he had prepared for the ambush. He just kept walking steadily forward. He had a flight to catch back to Miami, flying in standard coach. He was heading home to visit his mother, the very woman who had spent decades of her life scrubbing the floors of luxury hotel rooms she could never realistically afford to sleep in. I have no way of knowing what they discussed over dinner that evening, but I know precisely what he didn't need to explain to her. She already intimately understood exactly what the interior of those luxurious rooms looked like. She had simply spent her entire life viewing them from the other side of the service door. I drove home later that night thinking intensely about Gloria. I thought about Marco Rubio's mother, and inevitably, I thought about my own. My mother labored in a local diner for 22 consecutive years. She tirelessly poured hot coffee, cleared away dirty plates, and scrubbed down sticky countertops. Not once in her entire life did she ever utilize the word oligarchy. She never waged a political war against it, and she certainly never expensed luxury travel to it. She simply put her head down and worked. She came home utterly exhausted, yet she still managed to cook us dinner, and she never uttered a single complaint, because that is exactly how the people I was raised around operated. They didn't stand on soapboxes delivering fiery speeches about the plight of the working class. They were the working class, and nobody ever rewarded their struggles by purchasing them a luxury hotel suite. Nobody ever shoved a microphone in their faces and labeled their daily survival a movement. Somewhere out there tonight, there is an elderly woman sitting alone at a kitchen table, meticulously calculating whatever remains of her fixed Social Security check, quietly wondering if the $18 she sacrificed 2 years ago ever actually accomplished any good. Somewhere else, there is a working man who parted with $25 because a charismatic figure on a glowing screen promised they were going to fight for people exactly like him. I desperately want both of those individuals to hear this narrative. If you fundamentally believe that the politicians who claim to be fighting on your behalf should actually live their lives the way you are forced to live yours, then subscribe to this channel. Share this detailed account with at least one person who has ever sacrificed $25 to a political campaign because they sincerely believed that someone in Washington was finally standing in their corner. And when you do, leave just one word in the comment section: receipt. Because in the end, the receipts are the only things that always tell the undeniable truth.